Okay, so here we go.
Perfect.
Yeah, this is So here we back. We're back in now. So this is Stock Exchange, and this is Trump and the GE, where we discuss issues important to the community and the economy. Today we'll discuss Barbarians at the Gate for Endo International. And so we had a little technical difficulty with the previous video, so we posted, but we've identified about 8 companies that we think could take a strategic investment in Endo International if they haven't done so already. And last week we discussed Barbarian number 8, which had whose revenue was growing 4% year over year in total, and whose aesthetics business was growing 7% year over year. And we showed that if you combine Endo's aesthetics business, which we call Quo and Xionflex, with Barbarian number 8, it's would amplify its aesthetics revenue to around 30% year over year. So it shows you the value added from business on a combined basis. And some of these big pharma companies are having a hard time growing without hiking prices, and that's not in this political environment. It may be hard to hike prices after what we learned from Martin Shkreli and Valiant. So the aesthetics business is expected to grow, experience a compound annual growth rate of about 12% from 2019 to 2020 to 2025. So it has an organic growth of 12% without necessarily hiking prices. So it seems like a great space to be in. It's an opportunity for these companies to make an investment in Endo at a very low price, low entry point, and also piggyback on Endo's already research in the aesthetic space. So it seems like a natural thing to do. And we think at these prices, Endo should be buying back shares hand over fist. And we think that it's a fiduciary responsibility for these big pharma companies who are in the aesthetic space or want to be in the aesthetic space to make an investment in Endo. So it gives them an opportunity to put capital to work at a high ROI. Last week we discussed Reginald Lewis, who was the first black business, I think was the first black billionaire, or one of the first, with his acquisition of Beatrice. This is an Reginald Lewis would have been all over. Perfect. Endo would have been a perfect investment for Endo. For excuse me, for Reginald Lewis, it has a story to it. He would have waded through the story about opiate overhang and high debt load and potential competition for, and he would have invested in Endo and made a mint. Today we highlighted on the YouTube video, we highlighted Ivan Bolsky, who was a famed arbitrage, M&A arbitrager back in the 1980s and early 90s. He was part of the Michael Milken insider trading ring, and this would have been a great investment for Ivan Bolsky. He amassed a big enough fortune back in the early 90s before the Fed was providing liquidity to the market and printing money and giving it to people. So you back then you couldn't just wait for the Fed to print money and give it to you. So but he was part of the Michael Milken insider trading ring, which included Dennis Levine and a couple other people. But he he would have invested in this company and made a mint. Endo would be trading at about $500 per share right now if Ivan Bolsky was around, and he would have been loud about it. He and Milken and his cohorts. But we're trying to really give professional research, deep research, to people who listen to us, to our viewers, and get them professional research so they can compete with the big institutions and hedge fund managers and trade ahead of the thesis. Because once one of these barbarians get involved, it's too late. Once they announce we're taking a 30% or 40% stake in Endo, stock's going to go parabolic and the opportunity would have dissipated. Um, some interesting going on with Endo this week. They finally launched generic Chantix, which we've been talking about for weeks. Chantix helps people stop smoking, and Pfizer has been pulling Chantix off the shelves since June. I've done some channel checks. I've spoken to several pharmacies in New York. They don't have Chantix on the shelves at all. So Pfizer has pulled totally due to a potential connection to cancer, which means that Endo could have this total market to itself. It's $1 billion product. You assume Endo took 80% market share and discounted the product at 20% due to its generic nature versus a branded drug. It could generate about 650 million in revenue. This would make generic Chantix Endo's second largest product behind Vasostrict and just ahead of Xionflex. Vasostrict did 786 million in annual revenue last year. Prior to the pandemic, its revenue was about 550 million. So I expect this revenue to decline closer to its pre-pandemic levels as hospitalizations decline pandemic. So right now, generic Chantix would be the second largest drug at Endo. In a few quarters, it could exceed Vasostrict as its top selling product. And I don't think that's priced into the market. The stock rallied this week on the news, which we've been talking about for weeks, but I don't think it's totally priced in because it's launched a product that could be its largest product, could exceed Vasostrict. Endo has 42% EBITDA margins, and you have a given the scale, this product could come on at EBITDA margins of 50% and 60%. So generic Chantix could amplify revenue growth, amplify EBITDA growth, and amplify EBITDA margins. So right now you have Vasostrict, and you have generic Chantix, and you have Xiaflex, which has a run rate revenue of about $450 million. So this could again overshadow Vasostrict, and hopefully as assuage concerns about Eagle Pharma's competition for potential competition for Vasostrict, which seems kind of squirrely to me. Eagle Pharma won a patent challenge, but it didn't. But the judge didn't invalidate Endo's patents, which implies that this really isn't a generic product the way we think of it. There's like a new product, a competing product, and its pH range is outside of Vasostrict's pH range, which sounds like a new product. So it seems like Eagle Pharma should be required to go through a new product application and not generic application. So we'll see if the FDA approves it in December. But it seems like if it's considered a new product, they should have to go through the same clinical trials and the same safety and efficacy protocols any new drug application has to go through, which could take years. So we'll see how that goes. But Endo's also a highly shorted company, highly shorted stock. When you look at the effective float, we define the effective float as those shares not owned by institutions and insiders. Uh, percent owned by institutions and insiders at the end of August. We think there was about 40 million shares. The effective float was about 40 million shares. The short interest is about 23 million shares. Shorts have been dumping shares into the market to keep the stock manipulated amid great news on a New York opiate settlement. So we think the short interest right now could be in the 60 million to 70 million range. Endo has been buying back shares, so we think the effective float at this point could be about 10 million shares, which is highly conservative, very conservative. We'll know more in November, but Endo's short interest to its effective float could be about 600% to 700%, which will make it one of the most highly shorted stocks of all publicly traded companies, if not the most highly shorted stock of all publicly traded companies available. Much more highly shorted than GameStop or AMC, which have gotten much more publicity. And once the market starts to realize this, how shorted Endo is and its upside potential from aesthetics and generic Chantix and so on and so forth, we think that people will come into the stock and buy and hold the stock, and potentially it'll creep up to its intrinsic, what we think its intrinsic value is of about $25 to $30 per share. And we also know the shorts have been shorting less over the past couple of weeks. So as shorts slowly try to cover, we think that's also positive for the stock. But opportunity for individuals is that we think a strategic buyer like one of these buyers could take a 40% large stake in Endo, where it doesn't have to consolidate its earnings. So any opiate payments won't hit its P&L. So if you take a 40% equity stake, for instance, and then buy the 60%, other 60% in over time as the opiate overhang dissipates, and they could put assets to, 40% stake would be about $300 million. You're putting capital at work that's probably worth, even if they don't buy Endo outright, they put together $300 million that's worth 10 times what they invested. And then they could buy Endo on the cheap, the rest on the cheap in the future. The opportunity for individuals is that to get in before this happens, because we think it's only a matter of time before when these strategic buyers come into the stock, because it's just so cheap. And the risk is for Endo is that somebody could buy Endo on the cheap, which not be good for shareholders or for management. So we think management should continue to buy back shares hand over fist before somebody else does. So I'll let Mr. Mitchell weigh in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just reiterate that, or some of the other opportunities between Xiaflex and Quo, which we've stated particularly with Quo, I believe that period that Botox has been out, that quote surpasses Botox. I've said it several times simply because Botox at this point, less than about 5% of its users use Botox for its original purpose, which was to treat excessive sweating. And it's largely, its current large usage was about 90 to 95% of its users use it primarily for an aesthetic reason, an aesthetic purpose. So a non-medicinal or a not needed insurance is not an option here. The only time insurance will be able to step in is if it is a necessary treatment for an existing condition. So when we look at Chantix, the kind of going back to an earlier conversation when we, which we've addressed many times over through the opioid crisis, but as recently as covering Michael K. Williams passing, is that one thing that folks may not know or consider is that this isn't simply a drug that has been pulled off the shelves or it's not just a thing when you go into the store and, your favorite bag of chips just isn't there that week. It's no big deal. You may check periodically, but your life doesn't necessarily change that dramatically. Well, this isn't what we're talking about with generic Chantix. One of the things, excuse me, that Chantix serves as a treatment option for folks that are dealing with existing addictions. One part of addiction that may not be realized is that quite often folks that are weaning off of harder substances or harder controlled substances such as cocaine, such as heroin, even such as fentanyl, when they're weaning themselves off as opposed to just trying to stop cold turkey, they take a step down approach. And a part of that step down approach is smoking. So some folks will smoke marijuana, folks will smoke nicotine and cigarettes, and in many instances, a combination of both. So it becomes that intermediary between completely coming off of the drug and continuing to be an addict. For those that do use smoking as a step down, well, now that the threat or the concern for those that put down the heroin, put down the cocaine, pick up cigarettes, well, this is a potential habit that fills in the previous habits gap. In other words, now how do you address that? Well, this is where Chantix comes into play. So this isn't simply a product that's missing off of the shelves. This is a part of a treatment plan for those that are dealing with addiction and dealing with that constant struggle of falling off the wagon and getting back on the wagon. So the fact that Chantix has been off of the shelves is a huge blow to those that use Chantix to help them even wean off of kind of the intermediary habit that they've created as a result of picking up nicotine. Even when we look at to this thing, it's not, the numbers are great, but want to sometimes move beyond the numbers and really put a face and see what is the real world impact. And this is a very real world impact. When you go into any treatment center, even with any social worker, and you look at literature, this is a bullet for them. This is something that is in their arsenal that allows them to help themselves. So smoking cessation is not just simply a product that's on the shelf. It has a real world impact, and it has real faces that are being impacted. The second part of that is that this is a generic that Endo is rolling out. So you're really hitting two birds with one stone. So on one hand, you're making Chantix available, smoking cessation treatment available again for folks that have been largely missing it, but also smoking cessation products tend not to be So, in any level of treatment, all spectrums of socioeconomic standing. So you will find some of those that are in abject poverty. You will find those that are highly wealthy as well, and everything in between. So obviously, those that are higher on the socioeconomic spectrum may be less concerned of smoking cessation products. However, as you begin to get lower into the socioeconomic stratification, that's where that becomes more of a concern, rightfully so. And as we've stated several times before, that Kaufman's study points to just between 2015 and 2019 that there was a 55% increase in healthcare costs. So that breaks down between premium as well as out-of-pocket costs. And to keep in mind, this is under the Affordable Care Act. So in other words, we have a couple of combinations going on. Rising healthcare costs, which means a rise in the wallet share, the size of income that's already being to covering healthcare. Smoking cessation, which is a needed treatment for these folks, is not an option not to get it. So when you put a version that's arguably going to be anywhere from 20 to 40% less than the price of the branded Chantix, well, now you have that, killing two birds with one stone. You're providing the treatment, but you're also doing it at a lower cost. So this becomes kind of one extra bullet to save a little bit of money for those that are struggling and still struggling with some of these addictions. So, I think it's important sometimes to really realize what a real world impact when we have these conversations, when we talk about the opioid crisis is not just a headline in the news. It's not just a thing of, raising the pitchforks and going after companies, but it's also looking at what is the impact on those that are suffering as a result. What is prevention and treatment look like? So just want to paint that clear picture. So anyone, because that I would think that especially as Barbarian number seven, excuse me, as Barbarian number seven gives consideration to potentially picking up Endo, and 1 or 2 years out revenue projections, as we've seen, that we're kind of guesstimating anywhere from 600 to 700 million. That's going to add to Endo's bottom line. That the potentiality of this thing is even greater than that, because as we begin to hopefully come out of this pandemic, just read as recently as we have another potential strain that we're looking at, and I think already in a couple of states, New York and California. And I think it's an R strain is what it's being labeled as. Just read it a couple of days ago. So we not. In other words, who knows, right? What a post-pandemic life is going to look like. But the long and short is that we are living our lives in a way that exemplifies kind of a post-pandemic transition. So we're going to be seeing folks coming out of their homes more, going into the workplaces more, going into their normal pre-pandemic activities. So these numbers are only going to increase, in other words. So the potentiality of just generic Chantix alone, I'm sure Barbarian number seven is looking at very closely. And not only to be able to piggyback on that, now we can bring in really the cherry on top, because for Barbarian number seven is that cherry on top. As you stated, 7% in the aesthetics, in their aesthetics business. However, they have not stepped into this of aesthetics. So they are largely, their aesthetics business falls largely within the dental space as well. So they have yet to step into this realm side of the aesthetics business. And again, what makes Quo so unique is that unlike Botox, the medical condition and the amount of people, in other words, there's you can look at the amount of people that suffer from um, medically labeled excessive sweating that becomes a medical condition versus suffer from cellulite. And cellulite isn't simply an aesthetic for folks, that it does represent in a lot of ways a medical condition that impacts blood flow, that impacts the way that even veins, this is where we get varicose veins. Sometimes cellulite can have a dampening impact on that blood flow, circulation, oxygen throughout the body. So it can cause a whole host of subsequent conditions as well. So although it is largely looked at as just unwanted fat, right? Unwanted fat, unwanted and aesthetic for a person's body, but it goes well beyond that. So in other words, quote, both sides of the market is going to be picking up the side of the market as well as the uninsured side of the market that wants to use it for cosmetic purposes, simply like Botox. So this is the thing that this is kind of wet dream, so to speak, right? If Botox could have its best case scenario, this would be it. So Quo is able to, in my opinion, surpass, given the same time period. Botox has been over 20 years, so given that same time period, I think that Quo easily brings in a few $1 billion a year. So as we ROI, in other words, when we look at Barbarian number 7, and which has about $6.5–7 billion in free flowing cash that it can use, even if it decided not to use the cash to, as noted before, there's two real ways that that some of these barbarians are going to step to Endo. And they're either going to do it on the higher end, cutting a check for the enterprise value. And at these current levels, have only pushed up about $1.50. So right now, enterprise value looks at about $31 to $32 a share, which puts it right at fair market value. Opinion, or they can do it the cheaper route and pick up 30 to 40% of the tradable float, which, even on the, we have about 10 million, even if you want to guesstimate a little bit higher and say maybe 15 million. Well, 15 million, essentially 15 million at an average of $3. 10 million at an average of $3. Talking about to pick up the total float. But if we're saying 30 to 40% of that, even if we just made it for easy math and drew a line down the 50% mark, you're talking about 5 to 7.5 million shares to be picked up at $3 a pop. So on average, so you can quickly see how easy it is for Barbarian number 7 to cut a check either way, either for enterprise value or picking up 40, even 50% of tradable shares, and not even see it. Couch. It was like finding $5 or $6 under the couch that you didn't know you had.
Right. So I think the point they're making is pretty important in terms of the tradable float, and that to buy 40% of the entire shares outstanding, they would have to convince someone, some insiders or
Yep.
institutions, to sell, which means they want to push up the price.
Correct. So they're able to get, their hands on Endo shares for fairly cheaply at this rate. And even if they wanted to keep the cash on hand and simply use all debt instruments for enterprise value, just looking at the potentiality of Quo and generic Chantix alone, even if you ignore vasostrict, even if we ignore the fact that Endo has another 17 to 20 drugs in their pipeline or products in their pipeline that will be rolled out over the next 2 years, even if you ignore all of that, Quo and generic Chantix alone recoups your money in easily 2 3 years. In either one of those scenarios, enterprise using enterprise value, and certainly if you pick up half of the tradable shares. That's the whole point. That if I am a board member sitting on Endo, certainly if I'm in the C-suite, I'm jumping on the table. I'm jumping on the table and I'm hammering everybody because this means that A, you possibly have a company now that is sitting in the board meetings, sitting in the shareholders meetings that can completely swallow you whole without even a hindrance to their bottom line. In other words, the entire company can be swallowed whole. And now essentially the work that has been done over the last 3 or 4 years to get Endo to such a phenomenal point of going from, a massive amount of litigation that they were facing, opioid, mesh payments, vasostrict, it just kept going on and on and on. And Endo was getting slammed left, right, and center. And now that they have not only dug themselves out of a hole simply to, again, survive or just kind of keep their heads above water, they're in a position that they are now thriving. They have more cash on hand than their entire market cap, which in and of itself is criminal. They have about $1.5 billion unrestricted cash. Market cap right now is sitting just a little over 600 million. It's bananas, just that alone. So in other words, imagine you have this behemoth step in now and just completely scoop up everything. That means that even if this Barbarian were to keep Endo and treat it more so as a subsidiary, well, guess what? You still have another chain of command to opposed to taking the risk in R&D, the type of investments that you have found best to move forward. And the only folks that needed convincing was management and the board members to do so. But now you have this whole other entity in which you have to report to and get approvals and to do things, which becomes a hindrance. It becomes more red tape, and it slows down R&D. It slows down the ability to roll out or potentially roll out products market much more quickly, in other words. So it removes that ability for Endo to remain nimble and to continue to be a strong market competitor. So this would be the danger. And if as I stated, if I'm a board member, I'm sitting on the C-suite, I'm jumping on the tables, and I'm beating my chest because this is the thing that needs to be top of mind, that needs to be addressed immediately. Because just to remind folks that an enterprise value, cutting a check for $31 to $32 and simply buying Endo at enterprise is robbery. It is theft, because that enterprise value is based on today's price. And that's the whole kicker, is that do you give the company away for pennies on the dollar? Do you give this company away at $3 a share? So even a check being cut for $31 to $32 a share almost represents more debt than it does fair market value for its share price, in other words. So this is where that danger is, because maybe on the outside in it sounds like, well, hey, you got in at 3 and someone cuts you a check for 32. Yeah, that's great. I'm not complaining about that, but you absolutely should complain, because if you realize that the check should have been for 100 a share as opposed to $30 a share, does that treasure seem so much a treasure now? And that's really the conversation that's being had, and that's really the reality of what we're kind of looking at. And I'm quite sure that, as we noted, Barbarian number 7 is looking at this. This is a way to step into an aesthetic space in a way that they've never done before, and to be able to compete with some of the large incumbents and to potentially take it over. So this is, this is the danger of that, of kind of giving the company, and kind of undermines the last 3 to 4 years alone of hard work.
Exactly, exactly. I'm just gonna piggyback on those points, but first I'd like to make sure people subscribe to the channel and share the videos. And whatever you do, please wear a flame retardant suit because this that heat. Um, and you're not gonna hear this anywhere else because the corporate media seems to be on the side of short sellers, a bombardment of negative news. So this is not. This is Endo's. The fact that Endo's trading so low is a product of manipulation, which we talked about for weeks, and it's more of a media overhang than actual real than these news items actually having real legs. But if you look at and big pharma's having a hard time growing revenue. I think some of these companies have their stock prices are going through the roof as the Fed has continued to provide liquidity to the market, and the Dow's around 35,000. When the Fed stops providing liquidity to the market and sort of rolls back QE, you're going to see companies having a hard time to grow their share price because share price should grow with earnings and revenue. That's not the case. It's just growing because the Fed's providing a tailwind to the market. Look at the case of Gilead. Gilead has spent, if you're a big pharma, you can grow through hiking prices or delivering new products. Price hikes again have been given a spotlight by Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and President Trump, and it's not going to go well. Companies continue to hike prices just to drive revenue. Other thing you can try to grow through R&D. You look at the case of Gilead; they've had several R&D flops in the oncology space. Spent billions on R&D that didn't work out. Got to late stages and didn't work out. Now they are forced to make acquisitions at the height of the market, and so now they're kind of constrained because they can't continue to buy companies at these price levels in ball debt to do it. Constrained companies with debt continue to deteriorate, so they could be constrained. So that's the problem with Gilead. You spend money on R&D with an uncertain outcome, or you can try to buy companies at prices that don't make sense at these levels. Um, or you can buy Endo, which is done. I'll try to describe Barbarian number 7 quickly. Barbarian number 7 is actually an industrial company. It has safety and industrial products, which is about 30%, like 25%. Healthcare is 24%. And the consumer business, which is about, but the just what Mr. Mitchell pointed out is mostly dental and orthodontics products. It actually grew um, about 153% in Q2 2021. So when I was talking about 7%, I think I may have been confused. When I was talking about 7% growth, I was talking about the status business of Barbarian number 8, the first company we discussed. But this company right here, status business, growing about 153%, and that's largely due to the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic and people are returning to corporate offices. That's the headline number, but the actual organic revenue growth is probably more like 8% if you compare it to its pre-pandemic revenue. It probably grew around 8%, which is high single-digit revenue growth. That could be hard to keep up if as that segment continues to grow. So you have a company that has industrial businesses as we come out of the pandemic are generating growth, but I don't think the economy is that strong. To be honest with you, I think these industrial businesses, these transportation businesses, are going to show some constraints on growth. So they have to find a way to grow revenue. They already in the aesthetic space. Um, Endo's aesthetics business, which again, Quo with only 1 quarter of revenue, um, which is in startup phase, and Xyoflex would be about 25% of the combined aesthetics business, and Quo is excuse me, Endo's aesthetics business had revenue of 119 million. It grew 254%, and combined the two combined would have grown about 172%. But I think Endo has aesthetics business has benefited from coming out of the pandemic, but it does have legs going forward because closing startup phase. Its revenue gonna grow by leaps and bounds, and Endo has been constrained from a capital standpoint due to the fact that it had to wean itself off of pain-related drugs like Percocet and Vicodin and Lidoderm. Had to pay down mesh claims and service debt, and fight these opiate claims. So they had to been pretty judicious with their capital spending. They haven't been able to advertise as much as they like to, but now they can spend more money on advertising and make people aware that there are non-surgical options for Dupuytren's contracture and Peyronie's disease. And as they've done that, they're seeing an outsized growth in Xiaflex, and so this
Yep.
product has legs beyond just coming out of the pandemic. So we think that it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna have an opportunity to amplify revenue growth for an aesthetics business of someone who wants to get in the aesthetics business, someone who already in the aesthetics business. And again, Barbarian number seven has ample amount of cash on hand that it has to put to use in high ROE. If you buy Endo now, you investment in make an equity stake in Endo now, it's going to grow 10 times what you invested. Period.
Easily.
Then you can buy the another stake in the future, and you can on a blended basis you could buy this company at a much lower multiple than Gilead's paying for companies now. Then you can buy in the marketplace now because of this media firestorm and the fact that these short sellers have manipulated the stock and gained and sort of gone to this crowded trade where they've shorted Endo, which was thinly traded, and drove the stock price down. Now you're seeing management making adjustments in terms of buying back stock, but I don't think the market is fully aware of just how undervalued this company really is. So we think that 8 companies, including Barbarian number seven, which is an industrial business, that I think is going to be growth constrained from a cyclical standpoint. And this aesthetics business is a way for them to create outsized growth for the entire company, and it has ample amount of cash to buy Endo. So, and once these bigger companies become more aware of the opportunity, like right now, but it's only someone's going to strike first. So when that happens,
Yeah.
the stock's going to go parabolic. And the other thing is that you really you buy an asset, and you keep your competitors at bay as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's continue to say that that's really the danger of being an undervalued company, right? This is kind of a story of an underdog in a lot of ways, right? And while most folks love a good underdog story, myself included, this is not necessarily the type of story where you want to be be an underdog. Again, the company has done a phenomenal job getting themselves from where they were 4 years ago to today. But quite often the difference between a good underdog story and reality, in reality, the underdog is typically cut off at the knees once it reaches a certain point. And usually in reality it is the big bank takes little bank. That's really the reality of most of the underdog stories that aren't told in Hollywood and storybooks. We have to look at the reality of what's happening. And right now, we're looking at a situation where big bank takes little bank. And, as much as we would love to see continue to thrive, again, if I'm a board member, et cetera, the thing that I will stay beating on my chest about is what are we doing about this? One of the things that we've noticed, especially over the past few weeks, when it comes to shorts, is that and really kind of starting, if you want to start with the rollout of when New York, announced the settlement with Endo, which roughly 2 weeks ago. We saw it spike. I think it opened right around 270, 280 that day. Excuse me. And peaked out before promptly declining most of the day with just a few bounces here and there. But obviously, for us, and as I've stated, we got to put on our detective hats, right? Because any reasonable person would expect this thing to go significantly beyond the resistance level of 333. And how is it that this thing remained for the larger part of the day after hitting such a low peak? And the kind of the tail of the tape told us that we're looking at about 43 to 44 million shares out of roughly about 120 million shares that traded that day. Well, that was a significant clue because one of the things that it showed us is a ratio and how much shorts are destined. No, I don't even want to say destined, but just the the motivation to keep this thing down and to look at. I mean, that literally is the volume, notwithstanding this current trend in volume, but that's about the equivalent of about two worth of volume on Endo's typical volume. Endo's typical volume in a day would be 1.5, 2.5 million shares traded for the day. Is largely kind of a slow moving stock. It almost trades pretty much like a utility company where it doesn't fluctuate in either direction too much. And the shares are usually thinly traded. So, you're 44 just that day alone. Since that day, shares have the ratio, because that represents what a little more than 30% of shares traded that day. You're looking at a ratio or volume ratio, and as I've been tracking that since that day, the thing that I have noticed is that ratio has been declining, and to the point that even on Friday's trading session, even in relation to just under 20 million shares that were traded on Friday, that we were looking at about just under 3 million shares that were traded. So we're seeing a decline of the ratio, and I think it also gives a good set one of the questions that were posed, which for folks, yes, to encourage, because we've noticed we've gotten a few questions. I love getting questions. Love seeing that other folks are interested in this besides us. So you guys are letting us know that we're not just talking into the ether. And one of the questions that we got, I thought was a really great question. And essentially is about shorts. Like, what is it that shorts are hoping to gain ultimately by continuing stock dampened at these levels? And and I think one, sorry, that was just one half of the question. The other half of the question is it keeping it damping down in order for a larger company to come scoop Endo up on the cheap? So it was a twofold question. To start with the latter half of the question, we don't know. A very short answer, we don't know, but I think this is where we put on our detective hat, right? And you say, okay, well, even if you ignore what we're saying, right, you completely throw out everything we've said about Endo, good or bad, right? And and even toss out any other Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, dot, 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 right? Toss out anything, and now it's just your eyeballs, and your analysis. The question then becomes, or where you have to ask yourself is, well, has Endo gotten stronger, or have they as a company? So if we compare that just to the beginning of the year, where Endo was trading at $10 a share. So from January to now, it has dropped 80%, right? And just that drop would typically indicate, well, this must be a really crappy company. Okay, great. So if it is a crappy company, what makes it crappy? So obviously we have to look at the pro formas. Has the balance sheet gotten weaker that would justify an 80% drop in the price action, or has it gotten stronger? And even compared to January to now, the answer would be, well, it's gotten significantly stronger. That this thing has gotten Endo has got $1.5 billion in unrestricted cash. Well, how does a company get $1.5 billion in unrestricted cash if it wasn't debt financing? Then go to the bank, raise some capital, and then sit on that capital. So we can X that option out. Well, it had to come through revenue. It had to come through selling products, and essentially the way every company is supposed to get cash in the bank is by selling their products and services. So we have to then contend, well, that doesn't quite make sense, right? That the balance sheet has only gotten stronger, but yet the price value of the stock has declined. Okay, great. Well, the other question would then be, maybe it was overbought. Maybe $10 was overbloated. Let's run with that logic. Maybe it was completely overbloated. And now the current share price is reflected of the true or fair market value of the company. In January, when you believe that this company was overbloated, at that point, where was vasostrict claims at that point? Where was Quo at that point? And it brings us back to, has the company gotten stronger since then? So even if a share was fair market value in January, and since then the company has only grown in a positive direction, well, then we can at least surmise that the direction of the price action should continue to follow the trend that the revenue is going, which is up, right? That generic chanting, Quo is rolling out, and now we're looking at vasostrict, which continues to be one of Endo's largest money makers for their bottom line, as well as Endo 17 to 20 more products coming out over the next 2 years. So in other words, where do you think the price action would go versus today? Where should it go? Should it go down, or should it? And I think any reasonable person would guess, well, it should go up, even if you have no idea how far up that should go, but we at least get a sense of the direction it should be going. So in other words, even if you toss out what we are saying and you do your own analysis, it's going to bring you to a point where you have to ask some questions that is going to force you to look at the numbers and look at the fundamentals of the company, then to come back, well, why is this continuing to be shorted then? If the company has only gotten stronger and the balance sheet has only gotten stronger, the cash flow has only gotten stronger, the product lines have only gotten are only going to get stronger. What is it that would make a company, especially a financial firm, take out 1.5 million puts on Endo? What would make a company, like a market maker, one of the largest market makers on the planet, increase their puts from 163,000 to 100? But what would make some of these companies like a Credit Suisse, like a Janus, take a position that is betting company then? What do they know that we haven't already addressed or what we don't know? Maybe there's some bomb awaiting that they know that the other 320 firms that are long and not just what we often in the industry call bucket shops, but some of the largest asset managers on the planet, such as BlackRock, such as John Paulson, companies that have doubled down on Endo's growth. What do these handful of shorts know that some of the largest asset managers on the planet, what do they know that they don't know? So, in other words, Endo has the number of institutional investors on its side. Its financials back up what we're saying that the revenue is only growing. To answer the question, in other words, look at it from your own analysis and you don't believe a word of what we're saying, you're going to come right back to this point of what we're saying. And question. So we don't know. So I'm not saying that that is what's happening, but I'm also not saying that is. But I think it's a good question that requires a bit of due diligence and a bit of digging because it certainly then paints a picture where that is a possibility that there is some intentional shorting and there is some intentional dampening of the share price in order for a barbarian to step in and scoop it up. But whether that's true, whether that isn't true, if I'm sitting on the board or if I'm sitting in the C-suite on management's team, the question still lingers and has to be responded. What are we going to do about it? Because regardless of whether this particular part of the equation is true or not, it still leaves you vulnerable to the possibility of it being true. And that is the thing that so, hopefully that answers the question. I just thought it was a really great question and wanted to just take a long-winded minute or two to answer that question. So hopefully that is clear because for the level of market knowledge that the person that asked the question has. So just wanted to kind of take it step by step a little bit. So hopefully wanted to encourage, keep the questions coming. I love seeing the questions, love seeing the interest from our listeners and our subscribers, and even those folks that listen without subscribing or but they certainly use our words and articles such as Scientific American Journal for example taking paragraphs from what we're saying without giving us at least even an acknowledgement, just a shout out. Not saying that you have to do a whole dedicated section, but at least letting folks know where they could find us at will be helpful. But we even encourage you to throw in some questions as well. So yeah, just but I just wanted to take a minute because I thought it was a really great question that was relevant to Barbarian number 7.
Right, right. Thank you for that. But as far as why these guys are shorting, continue to short Endo, sort of the same reason Sir Edmund Hillary, when they asked him why you keep trying to climb Mount Everest, and he said because it's there.
Yeah.
These guys have found a thinly traded stock that they can manipulate that has an overhang because of the opiate litigation that's going on for 4 years, and nobody could really acquire the company without knowing what the opiate litigation would be. There was no 4 years ago. There was no pathway to an opiate settlement. Then Judge
Yeah.
Polster and some plaintiff lawyers put to come up with a novel settlement mechanism that created a potential pathway. And Judge Polster corral these guys and say, look, you know, you're not going to get. I mean, the plaintiff's not going to get a public nuisance claim against these opiate manufacturers, and the opiate manufacturers can't possibly go to, defend themselves against 3,000 court cases. So it's best to negotiate. So he spoke common sense to these guys that this isn't necessarily a legal matter per se, but it's a public health matter that the opiate manufacturers were involved in, and they need to pay. They need to spend money for treatment and prevention. That's the reality. But these short sellers have found again. They found a stock that couldn't be taken over. Then they traded, and they went for it, and they made a lot of money, and they've created their own reality. That if you have some of the biggest names, you can talk about Tony and some real well-known hedge fund managers all rush into a stock on the buy side or the long on the short side, they're going to create their own reality. You get like a bunch of short sellers who just short a stock into perpetuity. They can basically spend more than retail investors can, so they can drive the stock down. That's what will happen. I think things have changed after Endo put out that S3 a while ago, and then they're buying back stock. I think they created a flow for the stock, and then you're seeing now only a pathway to a settlement, but settlements actually happening. J&J settled, the big settled,
Yep.
Mallinckrodt settled for $1.6 billion. Purdue Pharma has settled, which was the worst actor. Endo has settled, and with several counties and municipalities in Tennessee, they settled with New York State. So there's metrics in place that shows how much Endo should probably pay for a nationwide settlement. They're probably having talks right now about how to structure this and what the amount should be. But why wouldn't it makes no sense why Seager Weiss, these plaintiff lawyers, Seager Weiss or Motley Rice, who have settled with Endo in New York, they have all the information about their sales prices. Why they haven't settled? Why aren't they pushing for a settlement in California or Illinois or West Virginia? Because they're handling this opiate MDL nationwide. So why haven't they settled? Why are they still going to court? Because this is now they have become a public nuisance. But Torian also compared, I think he compared Barbarian number 7 to GE at one point, like a mini GE. But
Yeah.
GE sort of did a foray into the oil and gas industry right after the financial crisis when oil prices were $100 a barrel, which is not a good idea. And then they also bought Alstom's power generation business at the height of the market. And right after that, alternative energy sources began to disrupt the power generation business. So they've overpaid for assets and overpaid for companies. This company shouldn't be a GE, and that they should have opportunity to buy a company that's woefully undervalued. And so they shouldn't be GE. There's an opportunity for them to stop being GE. Um, um, there are several catalysts for Endo. At a high level, I think obviously, I think there are more catalysts net right now than there are than on the upside than the other way around. For one, there could be again that we identify buyers take a strategic investment and try to buy the whole company later on. That doesn't include Moderna, which has to
Yeah.
find a way to diversify its revenue stream. It has so much cash. They're thinking about buying back stock at $500 per share, almost $500 per share. So they have no use for that cash. And they need to diversify their revenue stream before somebody else does it. Somebody else jumps into Endo before them. This is a great investment for them to put capital to work at high ROI. So there's 8 potential buyers could come into this thing. Um, maybe even a Wall Street bet to decide that this could be its next company to rush into and to make its tens of millions of subscribers aware of. Um, and we know there's some people out there repeating our talking points as far as effective load and so forth. So we know people are aware of Endo. It could be a matter of time before they also, millions of individuals also rush into the stock. You have Q3 earnings where you have there could be opportunity for if there's a bunch of pharmacies who have pre-ordered generic Chantix, those revenues could be reported in Q3 revenue and earnings, which would be great for Endo in terms of beating its earnings expectations and the forecast given generic Chantix for Q 2021 and for the first half of 2022 should be very robust, which could generate interest into the stock. And there's also opportunity for opiate settlement. God forbid, could you imagine there was a global opiate settlement? And these and these state AGs move on to do something else, or these plaintiff lawyers move on to do something else, like more productive. Or there could be settlements in certain municipalities like California or Illinois or West Virginia. So I think they're more catalysts to the upside for Endo than the other way around. And I think again, as more people become aware of the opportunity, you're going to see more individuals coming to the stock to buy and hold it, and you're going to see again one of these barbarians make a move on Endo, and when that happens, the stock's going to go parabolic, and the opportunity for individuals to get involved at these levels will be over. So we're just trying to make individuals aware of it, and give them the same research and the same due diligence that a Reginald Lewis or Ivan Boesky would have done back in the 1980s. So that's basically it. I mean, unless Mr. Mitchell have anything else you want to add?
The I think the thing that is a little bit lesser known is one of the trends that I've been tracking really since the S3 filing is how these shorts are covering, and it's been a really interesting tell that typically happens, and we talk about it quite often. At the end of the day, I think any person that follows the markets for any period of time will kind of notice intraday trends of buying in the morning, selling, kind of depending on how a position shakes out. There will be some afternoon activity in either direction, which typically follows morning trends, and then a bit of a sell-off in the evening. But one of the things that we noticed is that there have been some huge spikes, usually either the same minute as the closing bell, or the minute immediately following. So 4:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and these spikes have been as low as 250,000 shares, but as high as 3.3 million shares traded. And we believe that it has been shorts covering, trying to cover without shaking up the market too much, hence why doing it at the closing bell or the minute following closing bell. Because when we look at the prices for that minute after the closing bell, that the price only moves a penny. I think that is one of the most interesting things that I've seen. That how do you trade 3.3 million shares and the price only moves a penny? It's like, even for even 250,000 shares. Certainly, if you're talking about block trades that are happening, and just market, and the market has to quickly respond to those trades being dropped in the market, and is only moving a penny in either direction. So just wanted to we've kind of speculated as to what that potentially is, and what that potentially is in terms of shorts covering. And one of the things that we believe that it is allowing shorts to cover without shaking the market up, and obviously forcing them to cover at higher prices, aka a short squeeze, right? Which if you can get away with 3 million shares, 500,000 shares, 750,000 shares traded at the close or beyond the close, where market makers are largely wrapped up for the day as well, and allows you to get out of your position without alerting the market that you're trying to get out of your position. Well, it definitely seems plausible, at that point. But I think it just kind of goes to a feather in the hat of our strong claims that we have made over the past few months that this is that Endo is being manipulated, that that the price action and stock price is being manipulated. What that why is, right, is the piece that becomes the biggest question mark. Why are shorts continuing to manipulate? Is it just because they can, as alluded to earlier with the Mount Everest analogy, or is there something there that is indicating it should be shorting? Endo, and quite often, that's part of our analysis because we look at it. We try to look at it from all sides, not just alongside. Oh, excuse me. You probably hear my office printer printing. I think somebody's sending sending me a question.
Maybe
Hopefully, it's not the short sending me a right.
shut up. Please shut up.
That seemed a little serendipitous.
Why do you keep castigating short sellers? Asking for a friend.
I know, right? But yeah, we try to look at it from all sides, not just from, one lens, right? Any analysis, even if you're not a trained or professional analyst, should try to look at it from all sides, right? That's the whole point to game theory, as well, is just simply a approach to looking at it from several different vantage points. So we try to look at it from, playing devil's advocate. If we're short, if we're long, if we're Endo's management, if we're one of the 8 barbarians that we've identified, or even another type of market participant, which we've alluded to several times, such as investor activists. What does it look like if we're a shareholder? What does it look like if we're a board member? What does it look like if we're in the C-suite? So we try to, paint a clearest picture by diving pretty deeply into each one of those roles to better understand what are the pros and cons of being in that role, and what are the pros and cons of seeing the opposite roles kind of against you by being in one of those said roles. So this is just one of those areas that we have to give some fair amount of due diligence to, and analysis to. And if shorts are seeing something, what is it, right? There really hasn't been any pronouncements outside of, what I call the peanut gallery, when, there was talks of bankruptcy. And it's like, okay, how does that make sense? Talks of, comparing Endo or putting Endo in the same bucket as Malincry, but without giving any justification of why you're putting Endo in the same bucket as Malincry, and these very one-sided peanut gallery approaches to analytical work. But even being the peanut gallery, sometimes you have to play that role. What is the peanut gallery seeing? So outside of being in the peanut gallery, and these type of kind of hit pieces, so to speak, that lack substance, some of which have come from Bloomberg, some of which have come from the Wall Street Journal. Outside of that, we have seen no real pronouncements being made from shorts or otherwise that would indicate that the shorts know something, that the shorts have something. We've seen we haven't even seen an analysis by a Centron type firm. Any real dedicated shorts, they typically spend years building their positions, spend years digging into a company. This is how we ended up with Lordstown, for example, under the ticker RIDE, where they exposed the fact that it was built on an illusion. They really had no production, etc., and brought it to light. That didn't come from a weekend speculation. They spent years in that position and looking for evidence to support their position. So in other words, we don't see this type of dedication to the idea that Endo should be shorted. And even that becomes a question as well, why? If Endo a short play here, okay, great. What's the justification? What's the reasoning? What is it that the market has no clue about Endo, and you're sitting on this hot piece of evidence, the dirty little secret that Endo has been trying to keep shrouded and obfuscate about? Great, expose that. That is how shorts make their money, by building that position, exposing that dirty little secret to then become the self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we are, if this is the case, where is it? Like, where is it? We're not seeing that information. In fact, there obligation that, though, that information, as much as people hate shorts, they're kind of a necessary evil to the market, right? Because without it, maybe Lordstown would be trading at $400 a share, completely overbloated. Whereas without that expose, we wouldn't have known the real issues that are going on with the company. So as much as hate shorts and kind of hate shorts, they are a necessary market participant. And at least in my opinion, I welcome shorts because they tend to be that canary in the mine, that red herring that lets you know, hey, something isn't right here, something is vastly off, and we need to proceed very cautiously. So that's how I personally look at shorts. So I don't deter shorts from doing their jobs. In other words, I think they should do their jobs, their sleeves. But at the same time, if we're not seeing that, if we're not seeing a rolling up of the sleeves, then what is it other than simply a bit of manipulation? Then that, like, now you've opened up the window for all type of speculation when there isn't that type of due diligence being done. Is just simply shares that are being for the purpose of making a couple bucks, which at that point, that's when kind of the guns come out and the teeth begin to snarl at shorts, because now you're just shorting too short. You're betting against a company and you're wishing failure on a company. And to me, that's the unethical part. Like, you're wishing failure on a company that is providing a much needed treatment to folks that need it, and in a way that's going to discount their ability or I should say, discount the amount of money that they have to pay to get access to the treatment that they need through smoking cessation. Like, that's the reality of what you're talking about. So if they are just being assholes, in other words, then yeah, they rightfully should be treated like the assholes that they are. But if there's something substantive here, and it's real here, like, we welcome it. We want it on, because then Endo's management has to be held to account. That's the purpose of the board. That's the purpose of shareholders. They have to be held to account. And if Endo's management needs to be held to account, make it known. Make it known so that way shareholders can do their job. Shareholders can do their jobs and hold Endo's management to account. But if you're just being a dick and and wishing that a company is going to continue to decline, well then, you deserve the judgments and that come with being that asshole, frankly. So yeah, I think that's just kind of my 2 cents on it.
Right, and so the motif of, when we talk about Reginald Lewis and Ivan Bolsky and Michael Milken, is, I think, is apt here because from a fundamental standpoint, everything we know about Endo 2 3 years ago, has a lot of debt, has opiate exposure, so on and so forth. Now there's a pathway to opiate settlement, but the stock trades lower. Makes no sense.
Right,
Everybody's selling, but you think the stock would rise. And so
right,
you give Malincraft, for instance, settle for $1.6 billion. Endo has less. Let's make sure we're clear. We keep hearing these questions on these chat rooms about OP exposure. Endo has less OP exposure than Malincraft. Period. They took upon off the market in 2017. Said it 500 times already. Endo has been praised by the Oklahoma State AG for its actions amid the opium epidemic. The actions it took to take a pawn off the market and to change its marketing strategies and be an exemplar for the other opiate manufacturers how to react to an opium epidemic. Endo and Mallinckrodt have nothing in common. Mallinckrodt was going bankrupt regardless. It was not a going concern because its main product, Actar, was revenue for that product was falling and he couldn't repay his debt. Period. Had nothing to do with Mallinckrodt. And so, if these sorts are betting that the stock is going to fall, why would they short 40 million shares in a day on good news? Are they betting the stock's going to fall or are they making it fall? They're manipulating it. They're making it fall. If they stop shorting, the stock will rise. Period. They're creating their own reality. And so it looks like you have a bunch of insiders who are shorting a stock, and there's no other hedge fund managers who want to go against their friends. They don't know other hedge fund managers who wants to buy Endo on the other side to go against their friends. Where the comparison of Michael Milk and Ivan Boesky, Reginald Lewis was apt because they were considered outsiders. They were teeing up blue chip companies who were inefficient. You follow? So if Ivan Boesky was around right now, if Reginald Lewis was around right now, they would have teed these shorts up and would have made them pay. They were considered outsiders. And they would have teed these hedge fund managers who all clubby, they all know each other, they all go to the same schools, and they all go to the same country clubs, and they all friends, and they all act in concert. Get engaged in these crowded trades on the buy side, on the long side, or the short side. And they all seem to know what the Fed's going to do before the Fed does it for some reason. They all seem to know what policymakers, they all seem to know what Nancy Pelosi and these policymakers are going to do before they actually do it. It's uncanny how they know what laws policymakers are going to pass before they pass it. And they trade it months ahead of what's going to happen. It's uncanny how they know so much. They're so smart, so prescient. But, so, it's apt when you talk about original. These guys were around the original Lewis, Ivan Boesky, Michael Milk, and they would be buying Endo on the other side. Period. Because these guys were considered outsiders. That's how they made their name on, teaming up inefficient companies and finding market opportunities that the insiders had invested in, or were on the wrong side of a trade. But anyway, so next week we'll discuss Barbarian number 6 if we get to that, assuming somebody else doesn't buy Endo in between. But that's Trump and the GE, also known as This That Heat. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you